In June 1962, at a textile factory in the southern United States, something impossible happened. Workers, mostly women, started complaining about mysterious insect bites, nausea, dizziness, breaking out in rashes. Within days, 62 workers were affected. Some were hospitalized. The doctors ran every test, called in entomologists. The investigators looked everywhere. Nothing. No insect could produce those symptoms. No physical cause existed. Yet more workers kept reporting symptoms. But here's where it gets strange. After extensive public investigations concluded there was no actual bug, that the illnesses were, based on what we know, likely driven by stress and suggestion, the symptoms stopped almost immediately. The workers weren't lying. They genuinely felt what they felt. But they were following something invisible. Here's what kept me up thinking about this. What if I told you that right now, in this exact moment, your brain is using the same mechanism that caused those 62 workers to experience physical symptoms from a threat that didn't exist? That same force is deciding what you watch, what you believe, what you buy, and maybe even who you are. And you almost never notice it happening. This is the strange, unsettling reason people follow crowds and why understanding it might be the most important thing you learn today. Let me take you back to 1935. A psychologist named Muzafer Sherif did something that sounds innocent but was actually kind of sinister. He put people in a completely dark room and showed them a single dot of light. Then he asked them to estimate how far the light moved. Here's where it gets interesting. The light wasn't actually moving at all. It was stationary. Your eyes just thought it was moving because of something called the autokinetic effect and optical illusion. When people sat alone, their estimates were all over the place. One person thought it moved an inch. Another thought it moved a foot. Total chaos. But when Sherif put people in groups, something shifted. Slowly, their estimates started converging. Within a few trials, they weren't just estimating near each other, they were estimating almost identically. They'd unconsciously normalized around a group average. The weird part, even weirder, days later, when those same people were tested alone again, they still gave the group's answer. The crowd had literally rewritten their brain's baseline reality. This wasn't peer pressure in the traditional sense. Nobody was saying, hey, give the right answer. There was no threat, no reward, no social consequence they could see. Yet their brains had silently shifted their perception to match the group. And this is where your mind might be resisting me right now. You might be thinking, that's an old study. People are more independent now. I don't just follow crowds because everyone else does. But here's what modern neuroscience found that Sherif couldn't see in 1935. There's literally a neural explanation. When your brain detects that the group disagrees with you, specific regions light up. Your anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex activate the same brain regions that process physical pain. This, based on what we know, suggests that social rejection literally hurts in a way your brain treats as a threat. Disagreeing with the crowd hurts. Functional MRI studies show that when people face group pressure, they don't just change their answer. They actually change what they perceive. Research suggests that the brain's perception shifts at a deeper level. Their visual cortex literally processes the information differently when group pressure is present. So why would evolution wire us this way? Why would standing alone from the crowd feel like standing on the edge of a cliff? The answer sits about 200,000 years back in human history. If you were part of a tribe and the majority suddenly moved away from the watering hole, what would you do? Stay behind because you personally disagreed. You'd be alone, dead, likely eaten. Being cast out from the group wasn't just socially awkward. It was lethal. Your survival wasn't dependent on being right. It was dependent on being with the tribe. And your brain knew this so deeply that it wired a shortcut. When the crowd goes left, your neurons don't even fully interrogate whether left is correct. They just start pulling you left. This mechanism isn't a bug, it's a feature. But here's what evolution didn't account for: the internet. Your ancient survival circuitry is now operating in an environment where the tribe is global, disembodied, and algorithmically selected. And the consequences aren't predators. They're ideological tribes, filter bubbles, and the amplification of whatever makes the crowd move fastest. A study by MIT researchers tracked how information spreads on Twitter. They found that false information reaches 1,500 people about 6 times faster than true information does. When measured by how deeply stories penetrate networks, some estimates suggest falsehoods can spread 20 times faster. It goes viral. it hits the crowd mechanism. And your brain, still operating on 200,000-year-old code, doesn't update its perception. It accelerates it. But, and this is crucial, the people sharing false information aren't villains. They're not consciously trying to lie. They're experiencing the same neural pressure we all are. The crowd is moving. The crowd feels certain. And certainty, when concentrated and moving, is one of the most contagious things humans produce. Let me ask you something. What do you believe about politics, religion, or social issues? Not the details. Just how confident are you that you arrived at your beliefs independently, that you researched it thoroughly before committing? Here's a humbling study. Researchers at Yale brought in groups of people and had them discuss a social issue. Before the discussion, they were asked their personal opinion. Then the group talked. Then they were asked again. The result, people shifted their position, but not toward the center. They shifted toward the extreme. If they started out moderately liberal, they ended up more liberal. If they started moderate conservative, they ended up more conservative. The group didn't compromise. It polarized. And this is the part that should shake you. When they were asked why they changed, they gave reasons. They explained their new, more extreme position with logic and evidence. But here's what the researchers knew. The new beliefs weren't built first. The shift was first. The reasoning came after. Their brains had moved with the crowd and then generated the story to explain why they'd moved. You're not consciously doing this because you can't. The rewriting happens below the line of consciousness. This is why people can watch completely different news stations and believe they're watching reality. Both sides are experiencing real information, but each crowd is pulling them toward its own extreme, and their brains are generating the narratives to justify it. The truly disorienting part. There's no villain here. The news anchors aren't sitting around plotting this. The algorithms aren't sentient. The crowds aren't coordinating. Yet the structure itself incentivizes the crowd to pull harder, and everyone follows because everyone feels like they're thinking independently. There's a pattern to what makes crowds move, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch did an experiment that became legendary. He showed groups of people 3 lines of clearly different lengths and asked which line matched a reference line. Simple. Objective. Any child could get it right. But Asch had planted actors in the group, and when the actors all gave the wrong answer, something unexpected happened. About a third of the real participants also gave the wrong answer. Not because they couldn't see, but because the group had spoken. Here's what's crucial. After the experiment, when asked privately, these participants knew the right answer. The crowd hadn't made them blind. It had made them compliant. They chose not to stand out. That choice, that tiny moment of preference for belonging over truth, is the engine that runs everything. It runs fashion. It runs diets. It runs political movements. It runs pandemics of both disease and misinformation. When you understand this, you see it everywhere. During COVID, mask wearing became politically tribal, even though masks are a simple public health tool with no political meaning. The crowd had turned it into a symbol, and people followed not necessarily because they believed the symbol mattered, but because standing against the tribe felt wrong. The same mechanism was operating in both groups. Both sides had crowds telling them what to believe. Both sides had individuals choosing belonging over independence. And both sides were absolutely convinced they were thinking clearly while the other side was following mindlessly. This is the psychological magic trick. You can't see your own crowd from inside it. So what do you do with this knowledge? You can't just turn off your tribal instinct. It's not a choice you can make consciously. But awareness changes the math. First, notice when you're feeling certain, not just confident certain. That feeling of clarity where the world seems obvious and people who disagree seem stupid or evil. That feeling is often a sign that your crowd has you. Not always, but often. Certainty, especially rapid certainty, is a warning light. Second, actively look for information that makes you uncomfortable. Not information designed to upset you, because algorithms will give you plenty of that. But information that genuinely challenges your group's narrative. If you can't find it easily, that's a sign you're in a filter bubble. Here's the difficult part. You won't enjoy this. Discomfort is why the brain prefers crowds in the first place. Third, separate the idea from the tribe defending the idea. You can believe something true and still notice that your belief is being held in place partly by crowd pressure rather than evidence. The two can coexist. This isn't about becoming a contrarian. It's not about believing the opposite of whatever the crowd believes. That's just another crowd with different symbols. It's about being willing to hold beliefs lightly enough that you could change them if the evidence shifted, but committed enough that you actually look at evidence instead of just absorbing whatever the crowd is absorbing. Here's something that rarely gets discussed. Crowds aren't always wrong. Those 62 workers experiencing phantom insect bites in 1962, they were part of something real. Their brains were responding to something. It wasn't an actual insect, but it was a signal from their workplace, their colleagues, their tribe that something was wrong, and their bodies responded to that signal. This same mechanism has driven every movement that mattered: civil rights, labor protections, environmental awareness. People looked at what the crowd was doing and decided to move with it, and that collective movement changed the world. The crowd didn't create those truths, but it amplified them, and amplification matters. So the answer isn't to reject crowd psychology, it's to be intentional about which crowds you let pull you. Ask yourself, am I following this crowd because the evidence convinced me, or because the crowd convinced me? Both might be acceptable, but you should know which one it is. The people who change the world are rarely the ones who stand completely alone. They're usually the ones who recognize which crowd is moving towards something true, and they choose to move with that crowd consciously rather than unconsciously. That case from 1962, the textile workers with the phantom insect bites. It's still taught in psychology classes, but not as a lesson about stupidity. It's taught as a lesson about how human we are, how much we're wired to care about what the tribe thinks, how real the threats feel when the group is afraid. The good news, knowing this about yourself, is the first step to thinking more independently. The strange news, you might find that you still end up following crowds, you just do it more consciously. And maybe, just maybe, that's not the worst thing. Because we're social creatures, we're supposed to move together sometimes. The key is knowing when you're moving, because you've decided to move, and when you're moving, because you've stopped noticing you're moving at all. What crowd are you following right now without even realizing it? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear how this lands for you.